All right, I think we're live.
Okay. Are we?
That,
The YouTube thing still says waiting. We should be live theoretically. Oh, it changed. Okay. I
all
don't know.
right.
There might have been a delay on my end. Anyway, yes. Welcome all everybody. This is Kaiju Masterclass special live stream event. I am founding member of Kaiju Masterclass, Kyle Bird, also co-host of the Kaiju Transmissions podcast, and with me is my good friend Kevin Derendorf of Mazer Patrol and author of Kaiju for Hipsters, which is a good book I would recommend. And for our event today, he is going to tell us about the director Takashi Yamazaki, who is directing the Godzilla movie coming out in Japan next fall, or I guess this fall of 2023. And one thing that we like to do here at Kaiju Masterclass is explore the other works of these directors that dip their toes into the kaiju genre. And we find that there's often a lot of things that you can tell about these directors by looking at their other work. And Kevin is here to give us a deep dive into the career and filmography of Takashi Yamazaki. So I am going to take a back seat and let him educate us all. And after that, I will be back if there are any people in the chat that want to ask me or him or both of us any questions regarding Yamazaki or really anything. So I will pull back now. And Kevin, tell us about Takashi Yamazaki.
All right, glad to be here. So I've got a slide deck here. Can pull this up, and as Bird said, we're just going to go over the filmography of Takashi Yamazaki, who, as of November 3rd, was announced as part of the director for the new Godzilla movie that's coming up next November 3rd, and he's got a huge filmography and a lot of titles, and I thought it would be really pretty neat to just go through and do a deep dive of who this guy is and what makes him tick. And you can see here we got a whole lot of them. So as Bird was saying, we'd like to look at the other movies from people who are directing these Godzilla films, and it's because I've noticed a trend. Basically, since GMK came out, I've been noticing it, that the Godzilla fandom sometimes kind of gets blindsided by elements that are in a new Godzilla movie that can be kind of predicted sometimes, or have precursors in other movies from those directors. So, if you were to look at GMK and be like, well, why is there Ghidorah sealed in a cave, and then there's something that has to be released for him to get out, and then you look back at Gamera 3 and be like, oh, okay, yeah, this is something that comes through, or the weird color tints in Gunfu and Godzilla Final Wars is completely prescribed by verses from director Ryuhei Kitamura earlier. Or if you were to look at the Polygon anime trilogy and be like, this is a grim space opera with poor animation, you can look at Seshida's earlier work on Blam and be like, okay, yeah. So this is this kind of tropes and flourishes that go throughout a director's career. It's kind of part of what we call auteur theory, where there are hallmarks in certain people's work that recur, and it doesn't mean that they're making the exact same movie over and over, but things kind of rhyme. So that brings us to this new movie that's coming out November of this year from Takashi Yamazaki. We don't know very much about it, but what we can do is we can look at what he's done in the past and kind of from there get our bearings a little bit, and kind of gauge a little bit to why he might have been a good choice for this movie, and what we might maybe expect. So people have been talking about Yamazaki doing a Godzilla movie for quite a while. So while the Godzilla fandom, I think there were definitely some people who were, when he was announced, were like, wait, who is this? And then there are some people that are like, it's about time. because there have been kind of rumblings about this, and we'll see why as we go through his filmography. But here are a couple of examples. On April Fool's Day in 2015, the Hatana blog had a joke that he was going to be the director of the new Godzilla movie, which was a little bit unfortunate because that was the same day that Hideaki Anno was announced as the director for the new Godzilla movie when Shin Godzilla was announced. Similarly, in Hiroya Oku's manga series Gigant, there is a whole subplot about Yamazaki making this movie Godzilla versus Papiko, as you can see here in these manga panels. So we're going to talk today about like who this guy is and why people have been making these kinds of jokes about him, and just kind of go through what he does and all of his movies. There are a lot of them, and most of them tend to be adaptations of things. So we'll kind of look at how they stack up against their source material. That might again be something to gauge how he handles adaptations, which, you know, Godzilla is a major IP, so there might be some deviations there. Also, there are going to be connections to the Godzilla franchise throughout this presentation. So, you know, people who are looking for those things won't get too bored. They can be like, it's Godzilla. So we'll get to that. So, very high overview of Yamazaki. He's been into special effects basically his entire career. And here are just a few things. You know, this quote I found from an interview in 2019 where he says, ever since I knew there were people making monster movies when I was young, I wanted to work in the film industry. Like, that seems like a mark of a true fan. In 2001, very shortly after his first movie, he was already being declared the Japanese James Cameron by public magazines and things. And he would go on interviews and joke about overthrowing Shinji Higuchi and things like that. He has 19 theatrical films that he's directed, has won 5 Japanese Academy Awards, and his dream project is a live-action version of Nausicaa, which I think he might have to fight Hideaki Anno in order to do that. He's also been every once in a while going on Twitter or in an interview making some sort of comment about making a Godzilla movie for about 13 years, as far as I can tell. Maybe that goes back farther. There are a lot of themes that tend to recur throughout his movies. There's a big focus on the Showa era. That's basically between 1925 and 1989. All you know, this is when he was growing up to some extent. Some of it is from before he was born, but there's a lot of adaptations of work, especially then from either his childhood or his youth. He's really big into CGI effects. He does some miniature work, but you know, pushing the boundaries with computer animation is really his forte. So when people are talking about like, will his new Godzilla be a man in a suit? I'm going to say probably not. He's really into tearjerker plots. He really likes, you know, tearful goodbyes. A few of the movies that we're going to talk about, actually, there were polls done outside the theaters to see how many people in the audience admit to crying after watching it. He's big into child and youth characters, particularly scenarios where you have like a grumpy old man or somebody who has to befriend a precocious child. Lots of historical dramas, lots of sci-fi elements, including time travel in particular, and weird creatures. Does a lot of war stories, and this is all across from, you know, samurai battles to modern like World War II stuff. Male leads, very few of his movies have any have a main character that's female, as opposed to, you know, like somebody like Shusuke Kaneko, who has a much higher prevalence of female main characters. Another thing with Yamazaki is he likes these punchy one-word English titles. Sometimes when even the source material doesn't have that, he'll come up with an English title, and that'll be what something is marketed as. So just kind of going over his life story. He was born in Nagano Prefecture in 1964. And as a child, he read a whole lot of sci-fi novels and manga, and particularly was a fan of Doraemon. You're going to want to remember that because Doraemon's going to come up later. He got really into special effects when he saw Close Encounters of the Third Kind and Star Wars as a teenager, and as such, he went to Asagaya Art College. So that's the same school that Keita Amemiya and Katsuya Terada and Masakazu Katsura went to, as well as Shimako Sato. And I mentioned Shimako Sato because she and Yamazaki worked together very closely. They became very good friends, and by that I mean they got married in 2012. So both Yamazaki and Sato joined the Shirogumi, which is a special effects house, in 1986, and were basically doing miniature work and composites for commercials, working their way up to feature films. Yamazaki had no interest in directing at first, and basically that's something that he fell into later. So just as a sidebar, let's talk about Shirogumi, because sometimes it gets misrepresented. Some people say that it's Yamazaki's company. This company was established in 1974, so he didn't establish this company when he was 10 years old. He joined it and kind of rose through the ranks there. The company basically has been in operation fully since 1977. It came into prominence with Nobuhiko Obayashi's movie House, which Obayashi didn't want to go with Teruyoshi Nakano at Toho for the special effects. He wanted to do something a little bit more avant-garde. And basically, Shirogumi became his go-to studio for special effects. Shirogumi continued to work on a whole bunch of other projects here and there. Eventually, they decided that they were going to do their own original productions. And their first was Yamazaki's debut feature, Juvenile, in 2000. So basically, ever since, Yamazaki and Shirogumi have gone hand in hand in terms of working together on all of Yamazaki's movies. They either did production or visual effects. And while he was there, Yamazaki also worked with Kyoko Shibuya, and she has directed visual effects on all of his later live action movies, and his did production for his animated movies as well. And just to do some myth busting here, Shirogumi did visual effects on Shin Godzilla also. This doesn't mean that Yamazaki did visual effects on Shin Godzilla, and this is something that was widely reported. CNBC, when he was announced as the director, had this thing that said that, Yamazaki, who had previously worked on Shin Godzilla, and they had to do a retraction because he did not work on Shin Godzilla. The company that he works at did effects for Shin Godzilla, as well as Shin Ultraman and Bleach and Attack on Titan, and most of Toho's special effects films, frankly, are done with Shirogumi these days. So kind of going through some of this early work as Yamazaki was working at Shirogumi, he did a lot of stuff with Juzo Itami, such as A Taxing Woman's Return, The Last Dance, The Quiet Life, Supermarket Woman, and also on A Sweet Home, which is a major movie in that it inspired Resident Evil, which led to an entire oeuvre of zombie movies in the 2000s, which was that's a Kiyoshi Kurosawa movie, but a lot of people say it was kind of shadow directed by Juzo Itami. Yamazaki also worked with Shusuke Kaneko on Who Do I Choose? And he worked with Shimako Sato on Echo Echo Azarak, the Tsuburaya Entertainment production. But kind of the transition movie that I think is most notable to call out is Masayuki Ochiai's Parasite Eve in 1997, because that was produced by Robot Communications, who went on to basically produce all of Yamazaki's future movies. And the cinematographer was Kozo Shibasaki, who would do cinematography on most of his later movies. So one of his early directing gigs was on Nanase Futatabi, or Nanase the ESP. This is based on a novel by Yasutaka Tsutsui, who you know from The Girl Who Led Through Time or Paprika, and has been adapted multiple times. So this is the 1998 version. So Yamazaki directed 2 episodes of this. I have not been able to track this drama down, so I can't really comment on it too much, aside to say that he directed a couple of episodes. But it was around the same time that he had his first pitch for a feature film. And basically, what it was Shirogumi wanted to make their own movie, and they kind of reached out within the company for suggestions. Yamazaki submitted this concept called Nue, which is a yokai. His was the only thing that was submitted. So they kind of looked at it. His budget was 3 billion yen, which is about 30 million US dollars. And that was way too much money for them to invest in. So instead, they kind of asked if he, had any other ideas, and he came up with Juvenile, which was his actual first movie, which is much cheaper at 150 million yen. But the pitch for Nue impressed the president of Robot Communications, Shuji Abe, and he invested an additional 350 million yen into Juvenile. So that raised the 150 million yen budget up to 500 million yen. And it worked out really well. And as a result, Robot Communications would be a producer on all of Yamazaki's live action movies. And Toho, who was the distributor for them, would be the distributor for all of his movies. He still wants to do Nue at some point. I have a quote here that says, if I had done Nue as my first directorial work, I don't think I would have turned out so good. If I did Nue, it would feel like it would be over, but of course I wouldn't be satisfied. So I think it's probably for the best that it didn't come to pass. It's always neat to hear about these live action, about these lost projects, but I think it'll be neat if he ever does get around to doing it. Hopefully he won't, call that the end of things. So his actual first movie was Juvenile in 2000. And this is an interesting story in that it's not quite an adaptation, but it kind of is. Basically, the manga series that he read growing up, Doraemon, is about a little boy and his friend who's a robot cat from the future. And basically, there was an urban legend about the lost final episode of Doraemon in which Nobita grows up and invents Doraemon and sends him back in time to take care of himself. This story has no basis in fact. Most people who have heard of it actually have heard of it because there was a fan published comic that resulted in a lawsuit about it. But Yamazaki was inspired by this concept and reached out to the author Fujiko at Fujio's estate and basically got their blessing to pursue this project. And as a result, it's dedicated to Fujiko F. Fujio, and it's called An Original Story Thanks to Doraemon. So in this movie, you have your first appearance by Hidetaka Yoshioka in Yamazaki's filmography, and he would later become the star of the Always trilogy, as well as Fuel the Man They Call Pirate. Some other neat little tidbits. The robot in this Tetra, who you see in the bottom of the screen there, was voiced by the legendary Megumi Hayashibara, who you know from Evangelion and Slayers and Pokemon and all sorts of other things. But she has an actress cameo in this as opposed to just appearing as a voice character. And that's kind of unusual for her to make live action appearances as an actress. The art director on this was Henri Jojo, who would go on to design all of the sets for Yamazaki's future works. So you have some nice continuity there that you can look at any of Yamazaki's movies and they tend to look very similar. This was pretty well received. It's kind of a minor cult fan film. And as a result, there was even a plan for in the year 2020 to go back and film new scenes with the actors now that they'd grown up. That was scrapped because of the COVID pandemic, but the main characters, as well as Tetra, instead have a cameo in Yamazaki's most recent movie, Ghost Book. They play the parents of the protagonist. So it's kind of, you can say that Ghost Book is a sequel to Juvenile from that perspective. So the plot of Juvenile is that it's about this robot from the future who befriends a group of children, and they basically thwart an alien invasion. And you could right away see kind of Yamazaki's focus on some sci-fi stuff and action. You have big robots, you have aliens that are very kind of like James Cameron inspired. The aliens also take on human forms in which they can morph themselves and shoot out tendrils from their morphed heads. This is very akin to one of Yamazaki's favorite manga, which was KAIJU, otherwise known as Parasite. Keep that in mind also for later in this conversation. And it, made a bit of a splash, even though it didn't get a US release. Well, Juvenile was inspired by Doraemon. There's many Japanese fans who also say that, Disney had this movie in 2014, Earth to Echo, which is about a group of 4 children, three kids, three boys and a girl who befriend a little robot who helps them thwart an alien invasion, and they think that seems very suspicious. I've had enough conversations with people about The Lion King that, I don't want to get into a big debate about it, but I think that's an interesting bit of trivia. Anyway, there were plans to make a sequel to Juvenile that kind of morphed over time into Yamazaki's next movie, which is Returner. So you notice that Anne Suzuki, the main actress in Returner, is the same lead actress who was in Juvenile, and that's part of that. It's a very similar premise in that there are invading aliens and mecha and things like that, but it's its own standalone movie. And this is the one that most people in the U.S. would probably recognize because it got a theatrical release in the U.S. It was widely available on DVD from Sony. You walk into any secondhand DVD store, odds are there's going to be a copy of Returner somewhere. And it's also known as has a ending credits song by Lenny Kravitz, which this is another thing that Yamazaki likes pop songs for the ending credits. This is very convenient for the production companies as well, because those tend to sell very well. There were plans for a sequel to Returner, but basically got pushed back when Yamazaki was asked to work on his next movie, Always, which completely changed the trajectory of his career. So if you just watch the trailers for Returner, it's marketed as a very straightforward action movie. This was kind of a period of Asian action films, so kind of gun-fu sort of stuff. But when you watch the actual movie, it does have aliens, it does have time travel, it does have big robots things and kind of Matrix-inspired stuff going on. So it is very much a special effects film. So don't be dissuaded by the trailer if you're thinking oh, this just looks like a shoot 'em up. That's some misleading selling that they're doing there. As I mentioned, Returner was well available on DVD from Sony. And if you were buying Godzilla movies at the time, you will notice that the Returner is all over the promotional stuff there. So I think that's why, again, a lot of people in the Godzilla fandom will be familiar with this movie, is that basically it was part of a package of films from Toho and kind of got cross-promoted. So you'll see trailers on Sony's discs, et cetera, et cetera. So after that, Yamazaki worked on a TV series called Animal Doctor, which was based on a manga from 1998. He directed a couple of episodes. Shimiko Sato directed 5 of the episodes. But this is most notable because here on the series, Yamazaki was kind of made more familiar with Ryota Kozawa. And Kozawa would later write the Always trilogy and the Parasite duology for Yamazaki as one of his kind of go-to future screenwriters. Again, this is one of those series I haven't been able to actually track down, so I can't comment on it too much. Even harder to track down is Hatsukoi.com. I can't find a picture of what this drama looked like, aside from knowing that it's a Christmas romance from 2003 with a title that is virtually impossible to Google, and is written by Shinji Obara of Tweeny Witches and Samurai Champloo. Yamazaki directed all 4 episodes, but I have not been able to find this one at all. His next project was on Onimusha 3. He directed the opening animation. I mentioned Keita Amemiya earlier. He did monster designs for the Onimusha series. And, people know Jean Reno from the 1998 Godzilla. He was a big part of Onimusha 3, as well as Donnie Yen doing action direction. But the CG director on this was Ryuichi Yagi, who would go on to co-direct with Yamazaki on many of his animated features. So Friends, Knocking on Monster Island, Stand By Me Doraemon, and Dragon Quest were all co-directed by Yagi. So here we get to Always Sunset on 3rd Street, or Always Sanchome no Yuhi. So this is based on a 1974 manga by Ryuhei Saigon. And basically what happened here was Shuji Abe wanted to make a movie about his childhood in the 1950s, kind of talking about what it was like to grow up in Tokyo, seeing Tokyo Tower rising in the background as he was, playing in the streets or whatever. And people pointed out that, hey, this manga already exists and is basically like that. So it was made into an adaptation of Sunset on 3rd Street. And Yamazaki didn't want to do this movie. But Abe said, hey, you're the next James Cameron. This could be your Titanic. And boy, this was his Titanic, because it won 14 Academy Awards in Japan, which is just completely flabbergasting. So it really kind of set the grounds for a lot of his career, including working on soundtracks with Naoki Sato, who became kind of his go-to guy for future projects as a score musician. And just kind of a bit of a background. The title Always was a contribution from Yamazaki, kind of giving a sense that this is some sort of continuity, that people are always the same from time to time, even though the title of the manga, Sunset on 3rd Street, is kind of about how this is a bygone era. And it's kind of from what Yamazaki was saying, a big influence on this was Love Actually, which is kind of about a large group of people and doesn't have a single main character. This is a similar deal where you have a family that runs a mechanic shop and a girl who comes to live with them, and a struggling author and the child that the struggling author takes care of. And it's just absolutely a delightful movie. So I can understand absolutely why it won so many awards. In terms of special effects, it has a deceptive amount of them, because this is all set in 1958, and it's a loving recreation of what Tokyo was like in 1958, with lots of CGI shots of the cityscape and the trains and so on and so forth. So even though you wouldn't think of like, oh, this is a special effects movie, it really is a special effects movie. So it's a good fit for Yamazaki. And the ending theme for it was done by this band Bump of Chicken. Yamazaki actually met them doing a chocolate commercial that used one of their songs, but they really hit it off, and so that led to him using their music for the end theme for Always, as well as the third Always movie. And then he wound up directing a bunch of their music videos as well. And a 35-minute long bonus movie for one of their songs, "Good Luck." I would recommend, if you're into music videos and want to see really cool visuals, these first two, Namida no Furusato and Good Luck, aren't really the they're kind of, here's the band, they're at a school, they're playing music. Whereas the later ones, Parade and Colony, that were used for the Parasite movies, are absolutely wild as music videos go. They kind of have monsters and aliens and things like that in an apocalyptic setting, and it's very much a special effects extravaganza style of music video. Next, something that's not very well recognized is that Yamazaki did special effects and did a screenwriting pass on Norman England's movie The Idol, which was written by Jiro Kaneko, is available from SRS Cinema. But notable here for the fact that on the set of The Idol, Yamazaki met Kakuse Fujiwara, the monster maker, and that led them to collaborate because Fujiwara would work on Yamazaki's next movie. I think you know where this is going, but if not, no spoilers. His next movie was Always Sunset on 3rd Street 2. Always had been a huge hit, so people were rushing right into a sequel. So you get this follow-up that's set 4 months after the prior film. And surprisingly enough, it did even better at the box office than the first one did, even though it didn't win quite as many awards. This is very much a kind of straightforward sequel. It's more adventures with these same characters that you've seen, just a little bit later in the timeline, following up on stuff that they had done in the previous movie. You get a little bit more story about the father's experience during the war, for an example, about how it affected the mother, etc., etc. But it's not a huge departure, and because of that, maybe it didn't win as many awards. But what most people in the Western fandom know about this movie is that it opens with a dream sequence in which Godzilla rampages through the streets of Tokyo. And this was a big promotional push. It was hidden from audiences until the movie actually came out. But once it was out, it was widely publicized because this was, as you will remember, during the, quote, wilderness years for the Godzilla franchise. So it was basically not expected that there would be a sudden new Godzilla appearance. And this was a full CGI Godzilla appearance. And people were really excited about it. And to this day, I still see people, post images from this and claim it's from a new Godzilla movie that's upcoming. And I shake my head and feel very frustrated. It's worth noting also that this is not completely unprecedented for the Sunset on 3rd Street franchise. If you'll see this cover of one of the volumes of manga here, there's actually a silhouette of Godzilla in the background. So a few other things that Yamazaki had worked on. He did CGI for the commercials for this Evangelion pachinko game. Everybody should know Evangelion as kaiju fans, so I won't go too far into that. He was also listed as cooperating on the script for Shimiko Sato's movie K-20, The Fiend with 20 Faces. That's a superhero type of thing. It's set in an alternate universe, Japan in the 50s, but it's an alternate universe where Japan didn't lose the Second World War. It's based on a novel from 1988 that is in turn inspired by the classic Edogawa Rampo story of the man with 20 faces, or the fiend with 20 faces. It's very much kind of like a special effects superhero extravaganza type of thing. Takeshi Kaneshiro from Returner is in the lead, and it's available on DVD from Viz. Again, I don't know how much Yamazaki actually did on this because he's just listed as cooperating on the script, so that might not be that big. But his next directorial movie was fascinating. This is Ballad. In Japanese, it's Ballad Namonaki Koi no Uta, or Ballad, the Nameless Love Song. And you would not guess, based on the poster art here, what this is based on. This is based on a Crayon Shin-chan movie from 2002. Crayon Shin-chan is a manga from 1990. We'll get into that in a little bit. But basically, this was partially inspired by Yamazaki visiting filming locations for The Last Samurai while that was being made. And he was talking in interviews. I was looking at interviews written basically when Returner came out, and he was saying like, "Oh, I just saw this new Crayon Shin-chan movie, and I want to do something similar with these big dramatic battle sequences." And I guess eventually he was able to just completely remake that movie. And the storyboards for this were by a Crayon Shin-chan director, Tsutomu Mitsushima, who went to high school with Yamazaki. So for those who don't know what Crayon Shin-chan is, it is a sitcom about an obnoxious elementary school student and his family. And he basically goes around causing trouble for people. But this particular movie that this is based on is an outlier in Shin-chan, as it's about the family traveling back in time to samurai times and participating in a battle. And basically, this is a very faithful recreation of that particular movie, which is not typical of the Shin-chan franchise. So it's very strange, just as an IP perspective of like, if you're going to do a live action version of this character, this is not the story that anyone would have picked as a go-to. But here we are, and this is what happened. It's also worth noting that there are little deviations. So, the main character in Crayon Shin-chan is Shinosuke, whereas the main character in Ballad is Shinichi. So he's still a Shin, but he's a different name, and it's similar with the other family members as well. So even though this is recreating a lot of the moments and scenes from this movie, it's doing it in a slightly different way, and it's really bringing up a lot of the pathos of the story with the samurai, and the main child character isn't quite as obnoxious as you get in the cartoon, because he is quite a brat in the cartoon. Godzilla fans will probably recognize Crayon Shin-chan from his crossover with Godzilla. When Shin Godzilla came out, there was a Crayon Shin-chan versus Shin Godzilla, and also from Shinosuke's figure that he has in many episodes, Shirin Marudashi, which is a Godzilla figure with the tail cut off, so he just replaces it with a baby doll butt, and you can buy that as an actual figure in Japan anywhere, because it's Crayon Shin-chan is a huge franchise. Speaking of huge franchises, Yamazaki's next work was a collaboration with Shimako Sato, and it was a theatrical film based on Space Battleship Yamato. And this movie is Space Battleship Yamato, even the Japanese title is that, as opposed to the anime that it's based on, which would be Uchu Senkan Yamato. So it's already going for that international vibe of trying to appeal to a wide international audience. Same thing, it's got a theme song from Aerosmith's Steven Tyler, which is kind of appealing to a wider audience there. This was originally going to be by Shinji Higuchi, but he was dismissed over creative differences for the movie, which is just an interesting thought experiment to kind of imagine what his version would be like if that had been produced. But this was a huge budget affair. The star, Takeo Kimura, put up a bunch of his own money. He basically offered his appearance fee to supplement the special effects budget. So there's lots of good special effects. Kimura is a big Yamato fan. He played the same character that he played in this in Smap Up Smap, which is or Smap Smap, which is a variety show, kind of like a Saturday Night Live sort of deal. This is actually available on Blu-ray in the States, so you can check it out, but you might be dissuaded quite a bit because Yamato fans really hate this movie. The 1974 space battleship Yamato, known better in the States as Star Blazers, is a seminal work of animation. It's kind of credited for a lot of the serialized format of storytelling in anime, and really raised the bar and led to things like Mobile Suit Gundam and Macross and so on and so forth. And this movie has a different vibe. It's much darker in the palettes, and frankly, I think it's worth remembering that this was 2010, and what was really popular in 2010 was Battlestar Galactica, which was a Sci-Fi Channel original series that was a remake of a show from the 70s. And it's very easy to look at this and be like, okay, so they're doing the same thing here, that they're taking this original property and they're kind of recontextualizing it for kind of a more gritty kind of aesthetic. There are other problems that people have with the adaptation. In the original Space Battleship Yamato, the alien enemies were just kind of blue people, and they are this crystalline hive mind. The kind of goofy comic relief robot character is reimagined as this big kind of super weapon towering thing. Several characters have been gender swapped from the original. You had characters that were male in the original and now are female. That's similar to what went on with Battlestar Galactica. And also, your main female character has gone from being kind of I don't think she was she was kind of stereotypically the girl for 70s anime in the original, and they've really made her like a tough fighter pilot kind of a character in this new version, similar to what happened with Battlestar Galactica. And a lot of fans of Yamato kind of feel that this is, disrespectful or character assassination and so on and so forth. So they are not very enthused about it. I think if you divorce it from all of that baggage, it's okay. It's not a fantastic movie, but it's worth watching and has some really nice effects pieces for a Japanese film of that time. So the following year, and you'll see here that Yamazaki is now on a roll, and there's going to be movies every year, sometimes multiple in the same year. He does his first animated movie, and as I mentioned before, this is co-directed with Ryuichi Yagi. And this was released in 3D because it's 2011, and all of the big movies were released in 3D at that point. And it's an interesting combination. It's an animated movie, but there are practical model physical backgrounds for a lot of the shots. So they would kind of build physical miniature sets and then animate the characters in front of them. This is very atypical for Japanese animation. This is all done with motion capture and CGI, which is not what you think of as anime. But it did well enough. It got nominated for Best Animation, and 74% of audience members who were polled said that this movie made them cry. So, that's something. So this is based on a 1933 children's book by Hirosuke Hamada, Naita Akaoni. And Naita Akaoni has been adapted many times over the years and has different editions with different art, but they usually have very traditional looking oni. And this movie Friends has very untraditional looking oni for your main characters, which are the red oni and the blue oni. And basically the story for this is that you have this island full of yokai that the yokai are living peacefully, but they're afraid of humans. The humans on the other side of the bay are afraid of the yokai, and they have kind of a tenuous truce going on. Eventually, a human kid goes to the yokai island looking for mushrooms and accidentally leaves his baby brother behind. And it's up to the red oni to take care of this obnoxious little human character now. Meanwhile, the humans are all in a panic and they start hiring mercenaries to protect them from the Oni. I think this would actually make a great double pairing with Oni: A Thunder God's Tale, the Netflix stop motion animation series that just came out. It's very thematically similar. I think the main thing that you would be cautious about in showing this to a U.S. audience is that this is a traditional Japanese children's story, which means that this kid is running around with his butt hanging out the whole time, and that might not be to everybody's tastes. I think it's also worth noting that this movie has a kaiju in it because towards the end, the blue Oni grows into this massive thing and goes on a rampage. So this is the first time, outside of Always 2, that we're really getting a proper kaiju scene in a Yamazaki film. There's also a cross promotion with Eagle Talon. I just thought that was hilarious because Eagle Talon is a hoot. Now we get to the third part of the Always trilogy. This was actually not intended to be the trilogy, so to speak, because they actually were planning to do additional sequels, but those never happened. And at this point, I don't think they ever will because it's been over 10 years at this point. But this is set around the 1964 Tokyo Olympics. And it's kind of funny, when the 2021 Olympics happened in Tokyo, there was a whole kerfuffle on Twitter where people were posting some screenshots from this movie claiming it was from the actual Olympics, and they had to be debunked. But this was also the only movie in the series that was filmed in 3D. And there was a fun thing where one of the actors, because of the 3D cameras, they can't do the rapid filming, he had to act in slow motion for a slow motion scene in order to capture that in 3D. Yeah, the sequels that were never made were going to be focused around the 1970 Expo. So unfortunately, with the amount of time that's gone by here, we really can't, with the same cast, have them. They will have aged out of the roles at this point. So those sequels, I don't think, can go ahead anymore. But if you want a Godzilla connection, this movie is set in 1964. So people do the Shay dance a lot, and everybody knows the Shay dance from Invasion of Astro Monster or Monster Zero. So Always is wrapped up, but Yamazaki's accolades are not wrapped up because his next movie was probably the next most acclaimed, but probably the most controversial in his entire filmography. This is the Eternal Zero, which is basically it's about fighter pilots in World War II. And, as Yamazaki would say, this isn't a pro-war movie, but it definitely seems like it could be read that way by certain audiences. It seems to be a, war is bad, but kamikaze pilots are good sort of kind of problem. But the plot is kind of going into the whole desire for some old people to, have their legacy carried on. It's about a couple of kids who discover that their grandfather was not actually their biological grandfather. So they go looking into their life story of their biological grandfather, who was a kamikaze pilot who basically took the place of another pilot, and then the other pilot raised his kid, who was the grandfather of the main characters. And this was written by Naoki Hyakuta, the novel that this is based on. And it's a very controversial. Hyakuta is a controversial figure. He is kind of has some hot takes, shall we say, on the validity of the most recent U.S. election and the war crimes committed by the Japanese and some other things that are politically not safe topics to really go into a lot of the time. So he is a controversial figure, But this movie actually seems like it has done well across different audiences. You know, it was praised by everybody from Shinzo Abe to Yoko Ono, and I can't think of two people on, you know, farther apart on the spectrum there in terms of their thoughts on war. But it wasn't entirely beloved either. The U.S. Naval Association really hated it because, you know, again, the Americans are the baddies in this movie. Hayao Miyazaki really hated it. Again, Hayao Miyazaki, if you will remember, had his own movie about airplanes in World War II, The Wind Rises, that came out at this time. I think that might be related. Eiga Hiho also didn't, they panned the movie. And I think part of that might be the reason why it's never come out in the States, despite the fact that it won 9 Japanese Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and got nominations for Best Screenplay. It was released on DVD in the UK, though, so you can get that. And then it led to another Yamazaki adaptation of a Hyakuda novel, Fuel the Man They Call Pirate. That stars Junichi Okada, who is also the star of this movie. It's funny because the main character of The Eternal Zero shows up in the novel for The Man Who They Call Pirate, but Okada does not reprise the role for the movie adaptation. I thought it would have been great if he'd shown up as himself against himself, but I guess they didn't go there. Next, we get to Stand By Me, Doraemon. This is a film that's available on Netflix in the US, so you can watch it. And this is Yamazaki finally getting to properly do Doraemon, as opposed to when he did Juvenile, which was just inspired by Doraemon. So this was a special thing for the 80th birthday of Fujiko F. Fujio, full CGI movie. And it was kind of inspired by, they wanted to make something that was similar to Toy Story 3 because Toy Story 3 was making big bucks. And it was like, what can we do that'll like kind of pull at the heartstrings and do some nostalgia numbers and so on and so forth. And it wound up being Stand By Me, Doraemon. It was a huge hit. So in 2014, the top grossing movie was The Eternal Zero. The second top grossing movie was Stand By Me, Doraemon. So Yamazaki had the first and second highest grossing movies at the box office that year. And it earned a whole lot internationally, $183 million. So it's the 6th highest Japanese movie ever, and is definitely the highest grossing Doraemon film. On top of that, on a poll of 550,000 moviegoers, 88.4% said this movie made them cry. And you'll notice Doraemon himself is even crying on this poster. So it's really going for that tearjerker. So Doraemon is a institution in Japan. You know, this robot cat from the future has been in countless movies, including, you know, the one by Godzilla Singular Point director Atsushi Takahashi. A lot of people know Nobody's Dinosaur from having a double feature with a reissue of Mothra vs. Godzilla when that came out. But this movie is different. It's the first one that's all in CGI, as we mentioned before. It's obviously the first 3D. It's the first movie that's not got Nobita's name in the title. It's just Doraemon. And it also is different because all of the Doraemon movies until this point have been standalone adventures. That's the gang of kids go somewhere and do something with Doraemon. But this movie tells the Doraemon story from the beginning and tries to give it a resolution at the end. So it's kind of going the full gamut of adapting several stories from the manga, as opposed to just adapting one story or doing an original story. And I think because of that, it feels much more seminal and probably appeals to a wider audience that way. And frankly, makes it more accessible to an international audience, which is a big part of why I think it did pretty well. On top of Doraemon just being a huge iconic property that appeals to a lot of people. So they really nailed everything in terms of the factors that went into this being a success. So we mentioned earlier that Yamazaki was a fan of Parasite. He mentioned even in an interview in 2003 that he wanted to do an adaptation of it, but he wasn't able to because the rights were tied up in America at that time. Ironically, that might have been James Cameron that had the rights at that time, according to some rumors. But until 2013, the rights were tied up at New Line Cinemas, and Jim Henson Company was trying to make a movie based on this. If you remember, early 2000s, every Asian horror property was getting an adaptation in Hollywood. But those rights expired, and Yamazaki was finally able to adapt this manga from Hitoshi Iwaki, and he did it in 2 parts as Parasite and Parasite the Final. Kiseiju is the Japanese title. And this is actually available on Blu-ray in the States from Funimation, despite them initially claiming that they didn't have the rights to it. And a lot of people will know Parasite because the manga has been released here multiple times, but it also recently had an anime adaptation. The anime adaptation was a cross-promotional thing for the movies. They kind of aired it on TV right as the movies were coming out to get people psyched up for the live-action movies, and that's a very common tactic in Japan when it comes to this media mix thing. Is that you can reach new audiences by kind of going into different formats. So Parasite is about aliens that come down and they take over human bodies, usually in their heads, and they go around eating people, as you see here in this repeating GIF, and they can morph and change into different shapes. And our main character is a student who only his hand gets taken over as opposed to his head getting taken over. So he and the parasite that lived in his hand now have to learn to live together and fight against other parasites that are now going around eating people, and kind of it's learn what it means to be human. And there's a great quote where Yamazaki muses upon how this never got a US adaptation despite having been licensed for one for so long. And he says that the main character lives between 2 species, and that's a very common type of hero in Japan. Goes for Kamen Rider, Ultraman, or Devilman. That it's not a straightforward possession movie, but it's kind of a fusion. So from that, he says, as I was making it, I came to realize that Parasite has a uniquely Japanese perspective. So I guess I can understand that. I still think it could have been made in the States, but maybe it would not have been well received. But while we're talking about that, Parasite did very well. And if you will remember, in December of 2014 at GodziCon, the Godzilla event in Japan, the producer Taji Ueda said, we'll bring the monster back to Japan with the high quality we've given to films like Parasite, which really feels like they are signaling that that Yamazaki will be the director of the next Godzilla movie. Turned out that was not the case for Shin Godzilla, and it wound up being Hideaki Anno, but it certainly led us all a little bit astray with this this quote that he came out. And Yamazaki didn't help this matter, because in February of 2015, he did this Godzilla sketch, which went, circulating on social media and stuff, and added more fuel to the fire there in terms of speculation, and wound up, just being a sketch. A short that Yamazaki did in 2015 is for the 25th anniversary of Tales of the Bizarre. So Tales of the Bizarre is a horror anthology series that's, I think it's on Osaka television, but all sorts of filmmakers cut their teeth on this this franchise. And for the 25th anniversary, they did a special where they had kind of all-star directors doing their own segments. So Shimiko Sato did one, Hideo Nagata of The Ring, Takashi Shimizu of The Grudge, Kazuyuki Motohiro. But basically what happened was Yamazaki's segment was an adaptation of a short story from 1993. And it's about a guy who wakes up and he finds that he has an X mark on his forehead and he can't tell why nobody else can see it. And he goes around until eventually he finds somebody else who has an X mark on his forehead. And they become fast friends. They kind of talk about what's going on. One day, this guy looks on the news. He sees somebody else has an X on their forehead and they're announced that they just died. So then he calls his friend to talk about that. And he finds out his friend has just died. And he comes to the conclusion, oh, this X means it's people who are marked for death. Then he's riding on the subway and he sees that everybody around him has X's on their foreheads. And then he goes out into the street and everybody there has X's on their foreheads. And then on the news, there's an announcement like, hey, there's been a new virus that's been circulating recently. You should be cautious. And then it's, a very grim Twilight Zone-ish ending. But this short was basically forgotten for a long time because this special was kind of buried in controversial stuff over not Yamazaki's segment, but over Shimiko Sato's segment. Basically, it was very similar to the Ryan Reynolds movie Buried, with the guy buried in a box. And a lot of people were accusing it of plagiarism, and it wasn't a good look for this special, and it kind of got shuffled under the rug. But recently, with a pandemic and this kind of twist ending that was in Yamazaki's segment, this has been getting a little bit more attention. And I'm seeing like YouTube videos like, did this short predict COVID and things like that, which is a little sensational, but that's just kind of the way it goes. Yamazaki's next movie in 2016 was Fueled, the Man They Called Pirate. Fueled is the US or English language title. Again, it's one of those punchy one-word things that Yamazaki seems to like. Japanese title is Kaizoku to Yobarata Otoko. And again, it's based on Naoki Hyakuda novel, and it's about the founder of Idemitsu Kosan, the petroleum company. Even though Idemitsu was not directly involved, it does feel like a bit of a propaganda piece for them. And it's basically about, immediately post World War II, this guy Sazo Idemitsu taking his ship through oil blockades and going to Iran and getting into the oil supplies there so he can provide oil to the Japanese that need petroleum so badly there. It's apparently it has 3 times as many special effects cuts as always, but you don't really feel it because it really feels like a period drama while you're watching it. As a story goes, I found a neat quote from Yamazaki that he said the driving force is the surprise that there were men who did something outrageous in that era right after the end of the war, and everyone was looking down. I wanted to explore that background. So it does feel a little bit like, I don't know if jingoistic is the right term for it, but it definitely feels like a bit of a propaganda kind of puff piece. But again, Idemitsu was not directly involved, even though it feels like a big advertisement for their products and talking about how awesome their founder was. Kaiju fans will know Idemitsu because it's the company that made Ultraman Zereth. While there was not another Always movie made, kind of in the same oeuvre is Destiny, the Tale of Kamakura, because this is also based on a manga by Ryuhei Saigon. And this is kind of an adaptation of a whole bunch of pieces of this long-running manga that's still running to this day, actually, despite starting in 1984, about a husband and wife couple that live in Kamakura and encounter all sorts of weird yokai creatures and mysteries and so on and so forth. This was the final movie to play at the Toho Nichigeki Cinema, which you will remember from Return of Godzilla, is the big cinema building that Godzilla walks by and you see this reflection in it. So as a story goes, this is very much a bunch of kind of interlinking short pieces, but you have your main character, who is actually, in a rarity for Yamazaki, the main character is a female here. It's this woman who gets married to this mystery writer, and they live in Kamakura, and it's very out of time that you don't quite know. You know, the manga's from 1984, but everybody kind of dresses and has cars like it's the 60s, but also there are references to modern things. It's all very anachronistic, which is part of the kind of fantasy world setting of it when you start to run into all of these different yokai that live in the town and interact with them. And eventually it gets into a big action sequence where, they have to go into the afterlife and do a daring rescue. But lots of effects, lots of creatures, lots of miniature work if you look out for it in the backgrounds. So it's a fun little romp. I actually saw this on an airplane, so it hasn't had an official English language release outside of that, as far as I know, but it is available. And if that's not enough, the original manga actually has Godzilla in it for a short bit. So the next movie is one of 3 films that Yamazaki did in 2019. 3 movies in 1 year. That's mind-blowing. That this is the Great War of Archimedes, or Archimedes no Taisen. This is based on a manga. But, if Space Battleship Yamato was about how awesome the Space Battleship Yamato the Battleship Yamato from World War II was, Space Battleship Yamato is effectively, this battleship being turned into a big super weapon that flies through space. This movie is about how the Battleship Yamato was a big waste of money and lost the war. It's kind of an interesting juxtaposition there. And this is available on Blu-ray in the States if you want to check it out, actually, which is kind of surprising. But as I mentioned, this is about the creation of the Battleship Yamato, and basically within the military in Japan in the years leading up to World War II, you have kind of 2 factions. One faction really wants to make this big battleship. The other faction says, no, aircraft carriers are the way we want to go. So the faction that wants the aircraft carriers hires a mathematician to do an analysis and figure out how these battleships are going to be a waste of money. And he's not given any access to any classified documents or anything like that. So he has to talk his way onto a battleship and then walk around with a tape measure instead of actually having access to blueprints himself. And it's a fun kind of, it's a lot of accounting work, but it's done in a very dramatic, entertaining way. So if you enjoy kind of the back and forth, boardroom scenes in Shin Godzilla, like some people do, I think this would be a good movie to check out. If you think, oh, I really want more action, that's maybe not the best thing for you. Also, this doesn't adapt the entire story of the manga that goes much farther in terms of World War II. But yeah, if you look at like the cover of this with a battleship and explosions everywhere, the actual movie is, guys with books crunching numbers very dramatically. The next 2019 movie is Dragon Quest: Your Story. This is based on Dragon Quest V. Dragon Quest is a huge, huge property in Japan as a video game. It's kind of overshadowed here by Final Fantasy, but it's more iconic in Japan than Final Fantasy is. And this novel, this movie is actually notable because it had been in development for a long time, and Yamazaki didn't want to direct it, but he kind of got looped into it eventually. And it was supervised by Dragon Quest creator Yuji Horii, score by Koichi Sugiyama, who you know as the soundtrack guy from Godzilla vs. Biollante, but he's better known in Japan for doing the music for Dragon Quest. So obviously he's doing the music here. This got into a little bit of trouble. There was a lawsuit because the novelist who adapted Dragon Quest V into a novel made up the main character's name, because you don't have a name for the main character as a player in the game, and they used that name in this movie without her consent. But sounds like they worked something out, because this movie is now available on Netflix. And this is another one that's very contentious with the hardcore fandom. There are a few things that are outside of the usual here. As far as acting goes, this is all live action actors instead of voice actors. And the animation was made based on the actors' facial expressions. This is not the way that anime is traditionally made. I think, just as a fun aside here, Takayuki Yamada played the character of Pancras. Yamada is best known, I think, here as the main character in the Hero Yoshihiko, which is a Dragon Quest parody. So you can kind of see him in the side there in his live action and animated incarnations. Now, aside from the voice acting, this is controversial because one of the elements most associated with Dragon Quest is the character designs by Akira Toriyama, who is a huge known factor for Dragon Ball mostly, but Dragon Quest is on par with his Dragon Ball work in terms of people being really associated with it. And all of his designs are kind of repurposed here. So none of the stuff looks exactly like he would have made it. And he didn't work on this movie at all, which is kind of a bit of a sticking point in some people's minds, because he's so closely associated, even though his studio does get a credit. But the last element that really kind of set this apart, that's been most controversial, is a spoiler. So anybody who doesn't want to hear the spoiler, just mute this for a little while, and then when we go to a different slide, you'll know that the spoiler is over. But this is absolutely wild. But basically, when you go through this movie, it's very much a straightforward Dragon Quest V adaptation. But every once in a while, characters will say something like, "Oh, this time there'll be robots," or something like that. And eventually, you find out that this has all been a game for the main character, and he's living in a kind of virtual world. And the main villain basically comes in and is an interloper from the outside who is there to destroy the fantasy and say, "Hey, loser, grow up. You shouldn't be playing games anymore." And the main character comes back and says, "No, they're real to me, and I'm gonna continue to live these dreams that I have as a gamer." And this is very, very controversial for fans of the game, because it is a complete departure from anything. It's kind of a deconstruction and looking at it from a very critical philosophical level. And you can make a case that that's either brilliant, or you can make a case that that's completely inappropriate for this IP at this point in time. But Yamazaki said that, like, this was all his idea, and it would affect the success or failure. And I think that looking at reviews on Letterboxd, like people who hate it or people who love it, it's all based on how they receive the ending. So it's certainly controversial. We'll see how well other things are received in the future that he does, and if he continues to take really bold choices like that. His last movie of 2019 was a Lupin the Third film. This is called Lupin the Third: The First, which, if you just think about the title, you would think that, like, oh, is this like a prequel? Is this supposed to be Lupin's first adventure? And it's not. It's just called Lupin the Third: The First because Lupin the Third is the grandson of Arsène Lupin, the French thief character, and this is about his grandfather, who would be Lupin the First. So it's there's a legacy from World War II that is kind of being looked into here, and this is based on a manga from the 60s, and it takes place in the 60s, and it's set in France. They had French animators on the production team, and basically this was another one similar to Dragon Quest, where like Yamazaki wasn't initially going to even be the director, but he was brought on as a consultant for animation and eventually was just promoted to director, so he wound up directing it. This is the first Lupin animation in 23 years, which is a big deal because Lupin is like a whole institution in Japan. This character has had many movies, a lot of TV specials, but a lot of creatives have worked on it. The first Lupin movie was actually the a Toho flick that came out in 1974, The Strange Psychokinetic Strategy. There was also a live-action adaptation by Ryohei Kitamura, and people like Takashi Koike and Mamoru Oshii have done Lupin stories. Most people are going to know Lupin through the Hayao Miyazaki's Castle of Cagliostro, but as an adaptation goes, like Yamazaki's version has been very well received, and 3D animation from Japan is a hard sell, but everybody seems to really feel that the way these characters move feels very authentic to the 2D animation, and that everybody kind of gets their moments of glory in this theatrical film. So kudos to him. Well done. I have yet to hear anybody say anything really bad about this. If anything, there's some Hitler in the movie, so that might be controversial to watch with your little kids. But aside from that, it's quite a ride. Fast forward to 2020, we get a sequel to Stand By Me, Doraemon. This is kind of a follow-up about Nobita's wedding and some time travel shenanigans ensuing, so that the Nobita's deceased grandmother can attend the wedding, and so on and so forth. This was done for the 50th anniversary of Doraemon, along with Nobita's New Dinosaur, which is a follow-up to the 1982 Nobita's Dinosaur movie. And this generally did pretty well, considering that it came out in November 2020 when COVID was everywhere. It was nominated for best animation in that year, but it lost to Demon Slayer. If you'll remember, Demon Slayer was the top grossing movie of that year, so hard to fault it for that. Now we're getting to some more Godzilla stuff, because Yamazaki directed Godzilla the Ride. So this is at the Sebun Amusement Park near Tokyo, and it's basically one of those rides where you sit in the seat and the seat moves around, and there's a huge projection screen in front of you that kind of takes you through a number of environments. So the idea is that you're like on an evacuation transport ship, as Godzilla and Rodan and Ghidra are all rampaging through a city. And this is actually at 3 different levels, so you can kind of sit like at the ground level or higher up, and you get a different experience depending on where you sit in the audience. This is also notably set sometime in the Showa period. If you look at the buildings, they look very much like the 1960s. Frankly, all of Cebuan Amusement Park is kind of like going for that 1960s vibe. So that's right in line, but it's also very much in line with what Yamazaki does in terms of a lot of throwbacks to Showa era stuff. Godzilla the Ride has a kind of preposterous amount of merchandise, considering that it's a 5-minute amusement park ride. I kind of like my conspiracy tinfoil hat theory here is that they are kind of prepping audiences to get used to this interpretation of Godzilla, and that it will be somewhat similar to what we get in the upcoming movie. But we'll see. We really don't have anything from the upcoming movie officially available, so might be way off base on this. So going forward to 2022, we get Yamazaki's most recent movie. This is Yokaipedia. The Japanese title is Ghost Book Obakezukan, based on the books Obakezukan. And this is kind of, if I had to compare it to anything, this would be similar to the Gakko no Kaidan series that Toho did, or a School of Ghosts series that they did in the 90s, where you have a whole series of these books that are basically just little anecdotes of, okay, here's this type of ghost. This is what you do if you run into this kind of ghost. And then they have to craft a narrative story about it. So this has been adapted into anime, and there's actually a live action TV series, but the movie is radically different in that it actually feels like a theatrical narrative, and it has all of these yokai running around in it. And the ghost book part of this Obakezukan or Yokaipedia is that the main character has a book and runs into these different creatures and kind of figures out how to deal with each one of them from the book that he has available there. But as I mentioned before, it's got the cameo from the main characters from Juvenile, and it's got a giant monster at the end. So this is another chance to enjoy a giant monster rampage. And this is, a big dragon thing, very much in line with this desire to see a new Godzilla thing. And Ghost Book actually had a cross promotion with Godzilla, in that if you went to the plaza in Hibiya, where the Godzilla statue is available, they set up this sign with the main characters pointing and looking at Godzilla, saying, "Oh, it's Godzilla." So it's a fun little cross promotion there. So that brings us up to present time, and it's really, we don't know very much about this upcoming movie. All we know is that when it was first announced, there was a casting call on the Robot website for, quote, blockbuster monster movie. And it was also on the Godzilla Plus app. So I think anyone could put it together that this is going to be something for Godzilla. And this casting call also mentioned that people should be prepared to be in the fashion from 1945 to 1947. So we can tell that this is, again, going to have at least some scenes set in Showa era type stuff. Does that mean the whole thing is set in the Showa era? Does that mean that there's time travel? Is there a time skip? We'll find out. But it's already filmed. They have a lot of time for post-production because, they wrapped up filming in June of 2022. And I'm imagining that we'll probably in coming months start to see some trailers and stuff. But they went all out. They had an open call for visual effects designers and compositors starting in August and just wrapping up last month. So I'm sure it's still very much a little bit in flux in terms of what they're doing in terms of the special effects. But it's anybody's game as to what we'll see from the tropes that we've discussed in terms of what Yamazaki likes to do. It'll be fun to go through this bingo card and see if we have, for an example, a child befriending an adult recluse, or a cameo of an actor from a previous movie, or if it's going to have a punchy one-word title. It's all kind of stuff that we'd like to see from his works. So on that note, thanks everybody for coming today and watching. And if you're watching on YouTube later, thanks for sticking around this long. And if you want to see Yamazaki come to a con in the US, he's actually represented by Japan Legends. So you can reach out to them and figure out what needs to be done to get him at the convention. So with that all done, let's do some Q&A.
Good job, Kevin. Thank you. Very informative. So I have a question from Raf. Right before that, though, I have a question from Martin Caspere Smith that I want to get to. This is one you'll have to take because I do not have this experience, but he says, should I watch Doraemon? Because it seems more for younger audiences.
Doraemon is definitely for younger audiences. I would say that the Stand By Me Doraemon movie is a perfect litmus test, because if you watch that and say, I can't deal with this, it's just too kiddie, that's probably going to be accurate. But if you watch it and like, oh, I'm charmed by like the goofy, like, oh, he has a doorway to anywhere that he pulls out of his pocket or something like that, then go for it. But yeah, again, because these movies are on Netflix and they are kind of capsules of the whole franchise, I think that's a perfect place to start.
All right. Our buddy Raf says, would it be safe to assume Yamazaki's Godzilla film will be more whimsical than most kaiju films from the last few decades based on what's been shared thus far? That's a good one.
I think that there will probably be a heavy nostalgia component to it. I think that that's something that he tends to play on. And I do anticipate that there'll be, perhaps a stronger emotional core in terms of, characters kind of having some difficulties or something like that.
Well, compared to recent Godzilla movies, that's probably needed. All right. 5 Emilio Bocanegra, I probably said that wrong, says, is there any chance that Naoko Sato will work with Yamazaki again?
I think that there would be a pretty good chance, because I mean they work together on a lot. So unless there's something that I don't know about that, I would not be surprised at all.
John DeSantis says family. Thank you. Yeah, Martin says he'd love it if Yamazaki comes to G-Fest someday. I mean, hey, like Kevin said at the end of that presentation, he does have a U.S. rep for convention appearances. So, yeah, I mean, write to them, let them know you're interested. I mean, I think that'd be great.
He's a busy dude, but I'd be, absolutely keen on seeing him come to a convention.
I'm not sure if anyone's actually brought him out yet. So, I mean, he'll probably be in demand stateside a little more after Godzilla. So yeah, that'll be interesting.
I would think so.
And then Emilio asks, do we have any composer that you would like to choose? I think, asking, is there a composer that we feel would maybe be a good choice for this? I don't know. I mean, I'm open to new composers that, I might not have heard anything from, but
yeah, I mean, I think the only risk is, if you go with like a Sato or somebody, you're going to have leitmotifs that you've heard in other movies, but that's nothing new. I mean, go back to Akira Ifukube. There's like definitely music that you've heard in other movies when you watch one of his kaiju scores.
Yeah, they've been doing that forever. Anybody else? Well, we can give the folks a couple minutes just in case, someone's thinking of questions. I am interested though, you at the end you said, will I see one. I see you, Raph. But yeah, I was just going to say it's interesting that we're seeing a lot of people kind of assume that the whole thing's going to be a period piece, but you're right in that we haven't really had that confirmed. We just know that the casting call, some of those things were for people of that period, you know. So yeah, we'll have to know. There's no real way to see how much that period will impact it. It'll be interesting though, because you were pointing out a lot of the issues with some of his war films. You know, I mean, a couple of those being based on books by a literal atrocity denier. You know, so yeah, it'll be interesting if it leans more into like a right wing, more imperial sentiment or what.
Yeah, a lot of his movies have like over 2 hour runtimes also, which is kind of pushing things for a Godzilla movie, but we'll see how that plays out.
And Raph is pointing out that Lupin is fairly lighthearted and family friendly. And it was on Hulu last time he looked, and it's recommended.
Yeah, it's a charming movie.
Doomzilla asks, considering his history, what is there to expect is with Godzilla? Will he tend to I guess I think he's asking if Godzilla himself will be more something more serious to jive with the time period, or if it'll be part of a more whimsical tone. My opinion is that that's probably going to be dependent on how much of it is set in the World War II period. But
I think that the what we're seeing in like Godzilla the Ride is probably a good gauge. That's my 2 cents anyway. That feels probably going to be more close to that than something like we got in the Champion Matsuri.
Yeah. Emilio says he's calling it right now. This has the potential to be one of the most controversial Godzilla movies. I mean, probably. I mean, what's not controversial? What new Godzilla thing isn't controversial these days? But I mean, it's true. But who knows? I mean, the 2014 movie even was kind of controversial when it came out. Now it's like everyone's arguing about Shin Godzilla or King of the Monsters or something now. So,
the new movie will always be the most controversial one, but again, I just think it's important to go through any director's filmography so you don't get blindsided when a new movie comes out.
Raph asks, is Friends available in America? At one point it was the most popular show on TV and it was on Netflix. I don't think he's talking about that Friends. He's saying it's always up for more giant Oni films. There you go. That's the Friends he's talking about.
Yeah, I got my copy from Malaysia. So I went onto eBay and found a Malaysian copy that might or might not be a bootleg, but that's how I saw it.
Okay, so it's out there in some capacity, but
no official
fancy schmancy release. But okay. Yeah, we know, Emilio. There's definitely there's going to be some controversy depending on what's in there. Doomzilla says, considering if there's a time travel element, as to be honest, it's a very unstable plot point. Yeah, I mean, we've talked about time travel is the more you think about it, it never makes sense. How does I think he's trying to ask, does when he uses time travel, is he able to avoid falling into a lot of the common pitfalls of that story trope? Which that's a you question, Kevin, because I haven't seen that stuff.
I think it's there are different, he's done a lot of different movies with time travel. So, while like Ballad has some scenes that are effectively what you would call meanwhile in the present, there's I don't think like Returner, for an example, or Juvenile really feels all that convoluted, just because it's basically a Terminator sort of scenario where this thing comes from back in time, but you don't really have a whole lot of going back and forth between them. Doraemon obviously is a little bit wonkier, but that's specifically adapting, a very goofy, lighthearted property. So you're not meant to overthink the time travel in Doraemon.
Okay. Our friend John DeSantis, co-founding member of Kaiju Masterclass, has a serious question because he's been trolling us. Castle Bravo and the Lucky Dragon are the catalysts that led to the original film. Does taking the timeline further back dilute that significance? So, I mean, if we're talking about a lot of this movie taking place in, before those real life incidents, does that dilute, I guess, some of it? That's a good question. It's so hard to say without knowing, but I think it could, kind of depending on how much they're willing to talk about the nuclear stuff. And Kevin, I think this would actually be, we don't know, but I think this would actually be a good time to raise a concern that you and I have talked about, off air, just, privately, is that Toho are very much trying to mitigate and distance themselves from Godzilla's atomic origins. I mean, it's been a few years now. Hideaki Anno has said that that's actually something that he fought with Toho on, is, he wanted to put a lot of this Fukushima dangerous stuff in there, and they were trying to keep him from doing that. And actually the whole plot device of Godzilla having a half-life of such and such in that movie was kind of a compromise that they made, so he could put a little bit of that radiation stuff in there, but like, we don't want you to be focusing too much on it. And I don't know, I think that's interesting. I've also heard that just from people that have worked with Toho, things like, they don't like to have the word atomic included when they talk about his breath weapon. They want people to call it a heat ray. I don't know, Kevin, you've probably heard all the same stuff I have.
Yeah, like Singular Point was one where they completely just wiped the nuclear stuff out of the equation entirely. So I could easily see that being like a piece of that going forward.
It's a little concerning to me. I mean, if they do include that stuff, it would, I don't know, it would probably be, I don't know. Unfortunately, it might be like put in the back seat a little bit. I mean, that's a good segue into Martin's question here. And this is rumor, so possible spoilers. So, I mean, if you're sensitive to that stuff, walk away, plug your ears, whatever. He said he heard a rumor that the new Godzilla movie will have a similar story to the War of the Gargantuas, with two Godzillas, with one that has been mutated and one that has not. I've heard that as well, from no sources I know that are reliable, so it's anyone's guess. I mean, sometimes these leaks come from nowhere. They turn out to be true. A lot of times they're bogus. Who knows? But if that is true, my theory is maybe that is, a plot point that they might even cook up to be like, okay, let's try to, one Godzilla is mutated, another one's not, and maybe that's as much as we say about nukes, and we just drop it there. I don't, as far as the actual concept, I mean, anything that's written well can be done in a cool way. I'm not opposed to it. It could be interesting depending on, I guess, what kind of stakes the story puts on it. Kevin, do you have a perspective there?
I am sure from a pure marketing standpoint, it would be preferable to have
more
incarnations of
because that's the thing that got Toho to go along with Anno's idea of transforming Godzilla. They told him no, and then Bandai stepped in and said, but you can sell more toys. And say yes, and then okay. All right. Will there be other kaijus other than Godzilla, familiar or original? We don't know. The rumor is that there may be some sort of unmutated Godzilla somewhere, but then Emilio says he thinks that theory was debunked. So maybe we're just talking about stuff that isn't real. Who knows? Who would you rather have score the new film, Kootani or Shirogumi? Sagisu, Kaiju Kim? That's a great question, because those are two of, I guess, the more prominent post Heisei composers. I'll go first. I say Otani. I actually really like Shiro Sagisu's music, but and I don't know. I've only seen him score Anno stuff, so Kevin might actually have a more educated answer. But just going off of the Shin movies, I love his Evangelion music, but in both Shin Ultraman and Shin Godzilla, I did kind of get tired of him just reusing a lot of that music. And Otani's scores, though, just always hit with me. I love him. Kevin, what do you say?
I mean, sure. Gun to my head, I have to pick one. I guess Otani, but again, it's important to remember that the composer has a relationship with the director, and there's a reason why certain directors work with certain composers kind of over and over again. So, if we're getting a new Kaneko movie, absolutely Otani. If we're getting a new Anno movie, absolutely Sagisu. In terms of, Yamazaki, well, I mean, I probably prefer Sato, but if Sato's not available, then if we have to pick one of those, like Otani's certainly capable of doing good Godzilla music. So,
I mean, you would probably be able to speak, because I mean, you've watched more anime stuff than me, but yeah, I mean, would you be able to speak more to Sagisu's usual music? I mean, my question for you would be like, do you, outside of the Shin movies, do you feel that he's reliant on recycling those old motifs, or is that just maybe something Anno likes him to do?
That's something that Anno likes. If you listen to like Kamaga or Orange Road or something, like Sagisu doesn't sound like that. Whereas like Otani, like, I don't know, listen to the new Digimon soundtrack, and it sure sounds like Gamera. So
anybody have anything else for us? We'll give you a few minutes to think. That's okay. How many people we even have right now? Oh, we have 15 still.
Oh, wow.
That's not bad.
Everybody for hanging out.
Thank you. Don't be shy. Don't be shy. We're here for we're here. I don't know. I don't think we have a time limit. But yeah, I don't know. We'll give like 3 minutes maybe for someone to ask a question. I don't know. We can be I mean, you can ask us anything. It doesn't have to be about Yamazaki or this stuff. I mean, we're here all day, folks, if you want us to be. So, feel free to ask. Someone asked earlier who would win, King Kong or Anguillas. Whoever the writer wants to win. About the unnamed NUE, was it to be a horror movie, a fantasy adventure, or a yokai kaiju film? Kevin, that's all you, my friend.
Again, not much. I couldn't find very much on that movie, but I assume, I mean, definitely a yokai movie because it's a Nue, but in terms of the actual details, I don't know how much of that is under wraps because either he still wants to make it someday, or how much is under wraps just because it hasn't come up. Like, it's come up a bunch of times in interviews when he talks about like how he got started, but he didn't really go into all of the background, and I couldn't find any production art or anything like that when I was looking into it. So it might not be out there because it's still kind of gestational, or it might not be out there because nobody's asked. So, if he comes to a convention, that's something to query about.
Yeah, knock on wood. Doomzilla says, what kind of design would you expect? Is we got hints via the ride. I would think it'll probably, I think Kevin's theory is a good one. I am pretty surprised how much merchandise the ride has had. I think it would probably be a little different, maybe a couple minor tweaks, one or two major tweaks, but it would probably look very much like the one in the ride. It probably won't look identical because, you know, they're going to want to sell toys and merchandise and stuff like that. But I think it's pretty much, I think it's kind of a given at that point. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that you know, no two Godzillas are identical, but I think that there are kind of family trees that you can point to. Like I think the Godzilla the ride and this upcoming one will
Mm-hmm.
probably be on the same branch, so to
And
speak.
before the ride, that sketch that he posted in 2016 was also very similar. So
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
think you know it'll vary in a few ways, major or minor, but I think it'll look very similar. Chris French asks, any chance we might see something revealed during the Tokyo SOS screening, which is next month? I personally kind of doubt it. I know they're supposed to be playing Godzilla vs. Gigan Rex, the short. And they'll probably have another kind of awkward intro video from you know, the current guy, the current producer at Toho. But I don't know. I feel like those kind of announcements are saved for more big kind of events in Japan. I
Yeah.
wouldn't expect anything, but it'd be cool. You know, oh, we see a trailer or something we're not expecting. That'd be nice. But
April 1st tends to be the start of the fiscal year in Japan. So I would think that that would be a good time for them to, you know, maybe come out with a maquette shot or something like that. I would not expect a full trailer right away because
yeah,
based on what we were seeing with the, you know, the visual effects artists, if they were still recruiting them last month,
mm-hmm.
they're definitely still working.
Yeah. And you know, they might still be going back and forth on design stuff. Who knows? Okay, so John has a good question. Why do we think Toho is trying to downplay the nuclear roots of Godzilla? I have a kind of a cynical answer to that, and then I'll give it to you, Kevin. But I don't want to quote him because I would have to go back. It's been a while since I've like looked into this stuff, but I feel like Hideki Anno at one point said that Toho finds it to be a controversial topic. And as you can see by the international branding giant that Godzilla's become, Godzilla hot sauce, Godzilla, I mean, name a household item, there's a Godzilla variant of it at this point. And I think that they're trying to soften that for international audiences. I mean, it's kind of a, I think they're just trying to offend as few people as possible on an international level, just because, you know, especially here in America, I mean, people can get touchy about that, you know. Unfortunately, you know, I don't know, maybe I'm letting some of my politics out a little bit, but you know, a lot of people here feel like the bomb was justified. And
Yeah.
I think that Toho is really trying to make Godzilla a global brand. And I think it's really just about making things like that as soft as possible. I mean, even something like Shin Godzilla, which, you know, a lot of people interpret as more of a right-wing Godzilla movie. I mean, if even that had to have elements softened to kind of probably not offend, you know, the American market, the Western market, the international market. Like I said, the nuke element of Shin Godzilla was something that Anno was told no, and then he didn't budge, and they said, "Fine, we got to agree on something," and they worked something out to fall in the middle. And I don't know. I mean, I'm glad that the franchise is thriving and more eyes are on it. You know, the more people that check out the new stuff are going to check out the old stuff, and that's great. And I'm the last person to want, you know, a Godzilla movie that isn't any good. But it like I said, cynical answer, but you know, it is one of the things I really don't like about the direction that it sounds like they're taking. Kevin, do you have anything
Yeah, I
else
think I
there?
have kind of like two answers. The first is, you know, what you were saying. I mean, certainly, you know, we saw the thing recently with the 2014 script where uh, they had to redact certain lines that they thought were, you know, depicting the bombing of Hiroshima to in a negative light,
Yeah,
uh, which you know is unfortunate. But to this date, a lot of people in America will be turned off if they hear anything that sounds critical of the atomic bombings. And then the second piece of it is just, those bombings are not as relevant for a lot of modern audiences as they used to be. The people who kind of survive that era are fewer and farther between. And I think kind of if you're thinking about how you're going to survive into the future as a piece of cultural iconography, you adapt and change with the times. I think that's a big part of what Shin Godzilla was doing, and shifting to Fukushima, which a lot of people did remember and were more kind of the current zeitgeist trauma rather than something that great grandpa talked about.
That's those are all really good points. But it is one of those things where you can update the nuclear metaphor to Godzilla outside of just the bomb, which we saw with Shin Godzilla, even if it was softened a bit. So I mean, there are ways to tie it in, but it does seem like it's getting, they're hesitant to do so. And then the kind of backwards way that we've presented it here, the way that the nukes have been used in the legendary films and stuff, it almost flips it around in a way. And so I don't know, it's a little bit of a mess, but we'll see what comes of it. I think that the more we forget about stuff like that, the more doomed we are to repeat it. And Raph is asking us, what do we want to see in this upcoming Godzilla film? I think my answer might be a little bit more broad than what Kevin might say. I just want to see a good story. And I mean, I would like to see some social consciousness to it. I think that those are things that this franchise goes on and off with, but it works best when it is socially aware of something, whatever that may be. Or how it's presented is another thing, but I would like that to be kind of a something in the forefront of the film. I don't, with the MonsterVerse getting kind of as comic booky or goofy as it is, and with stuff like Singular Point and the anime trilogy being as out there and sci-fi as they are. I wouldn't mind something a little more serious at this point. Not necessarily dark or grim or gory or R-rated, but something that really feels like it has real stakes and characters that you can really empathize with. Not, these don't have to be character studies, but just characters that we enjoy spending time with. I actually really like the 2014 movie, but it's like the lead characters in that are cardboard. You don't care what happens to them. They don't do much other than react to things. I want the characters to be really integrated with the monster action in a way that's meaningful. And with Yamazaki and his tendency for tearjerkers and stuff like that, I just want to see something with real characters and a real stakes. As far as Godzilla, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it says a little bit that I haven't mentioned Godzilla much at all, but I don't mind Godzilla when he's a bad guy or a good guy. I just want him to be cool. He doesn't need to even spend a whole lot of screen time. Just make his screen time matter and make him cool. That's all I ask for. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I think that I can't disagree with anything that you're saying. I think that as a strong focus on characterization is key, and I think that I would really prefer if we focused on doing like new remixes on established ideas or something along those lines. I know that's a very broad kind of way to phrase it, but I don't need to see this is identical to some shot in a previous movie or something like that.
Yeah.
I just want
that's a good point. I'm kind of burnt out on that kind of fan filmmaking. I actually enjoyed Shin Ultraman. I have issues with it, but one of those things that bothered me in that was like, okay, the good Ultraman, the bad Ultraman fight, it's like the same fight choreography as what you've seen before, and it's like I'm just kind of over that kind of like Easter egg kind of, you know, uh recycling of stuff, you know.
Mhm.
Martin asks, other than the next two Godzilla, or I'm sorry, the next Toho Godzilla movie, are you looking forward to any of the other things, the MonsterVerse TV show, and the next MonsterVerse movie, the Gamera anime? I mean, I don't want to sound cynical, and I will. It's not that I'm not looking forward to them. I'm always going to be interested in whatever's going on with Godzilla, Gamera, whatever. With the MonsterVerse, I feel like I'm more and more getting to the point where I'm not sure where else there is to go with it. I think it almost feels as if it's just something that's, I mean, we're going on 10 years since Godzilla 2014, and I would like to kind of see more new and radical ideas in it. That goes with the TV show as well. I've enjoyed all the MonsterVerse stuff to some degree or another, some stuff more than others. So it's not like I'm poo-pooing it. It's just like it's kind of where I am with Marvel stuff. Whereas everything since Endgame, I've been like, okay, I'll watch it because I'm, why not? But it's not something I'm like super excited for because it's just more, we live in this age of content where everything is like, okay, everything just, nothing really seems to end anymore. So it's like everything just keeps happening, and it's like, okay, I remember the build up between Final Wars and Godzilla 2014, or even the build up between 2014 and King of the Monsters, or 2014 even Shin Godzilla. And now it's like every year or every 2 years, there's just the more of something you get, the less special it becomes. It's like getting excited about Air. We all love Air, but do we really get excited about it? So yeah, I mean, I'm a little more interested in the Yamazaki film than the MonsterVerse stuff, because I feel like, as these conversations have shown, we've we can't really predict what it'll be like, and that is what's interesting to me. I feel the MonsterVerse stuff, like I feel like I've seen it already and I haven't. If they want to surprise me, that's great, and I'll be first in line at the movie theater, first to boot up my Apple TV and check it out. But it's just kind of like stuff that I feel like is kind of safe and I know where it's going. The Gamera anime is a little bit more interesting to me also. I don't know what to expect, and that is exciting to me. So that the less I feel like I have a pin on what this stuff is going to be like, the more excited I am. So there's my rambling answer. It's your turn now, Kev.
Yeah, it's difficult without, all we have basically is a few sparse details. Like the Gamera anime, we don't know who's writing it, we don't know who's directing it. Like it's so hard to have any sort of metric on which
we don't even know the animation studio yet, do we?
No.
That's
it's
strange.
produced by Kadokawa, but that could be,
Yeah.
who are they farming that out to? We don't know. So it's just very difficult to get excited, and with announcements like this, when you have somebody who's a well-known kind of visionary, and you say, okay, this person is making this franchise, then you can be like, oh, okay, that's interesting. Like, and you can kind of level set, and you kind of get at least a sense right away that they're going to make something that is their vision and not a committee focus tested sort of deal. And I feel like Godzilla, frankly, has been really good about that in Japan lately. Basically, if you look at Ano or Gen Urobuchi or To Enjo, and now Yamazaki, they're all people that have very clear voices that are writing these screenplays. In the legendary side of things, it's a little bit fuzzier. So
the more expensive a movie is to make, the more hands you have in the pie, the more you have going on. I mean, even with the 2014 movie had active participation from the military, and like Kevin mentioned, there were some documents that were leaked that were showing like, hey, this whole speech from Ken Watanabe about how horrific the bomb was changed that. And instead of that speech, we got the let them fight scene. So yeah, I mean, the bigger this stuff is, especially in Hollywood, the more compromise there has to be. And that is something that I will say about all the Toho stuff, whether it's Shin Godzilla, the anime trilogy, Singular Point. Some of that stuff I don't like, some of it I like a lot, but the one thing I appreciate about all of it is that it's all very different, and it all seems, it all seems like work of filmmakers and actual storytellers rather than terms that and checklists that a committee are going through in a writer's room, Okay, so this is actually a really interesting one from John, and it's something that I've actually been thinking about. And I know it's something Kevin and I have talked about off air, just, hanging out or, on a podcast or whatever. But he says, do you think we will ever get back to tokusatsu, or is CGI being what it is in Japan what we will get from here on out? And then he followed that up with a very good point of, it seems to be the case as, for example, Shin Ultraman replicated, the suit wrinkles rather than just using a suit. I've been thinking about this a lot because here, where I am in Michigan, about 30 minutes from where I live is a King Kong exhibit at Eastern Michigan University with just all these artifacts, artwork, from Willis O'Brien, and then going into other stop motion artists like Ray Harryhausen, Jim Danforth, even having stuff from more recent people like Tim Burton, and I was thinking about stop motion and looking at the Clash of the Titans stuff that was on display, and I was just thinking about how when that movie came out, it really wasn't the kind Hollywood had evolved that beyond that kind of fantasy film. That wasn't really what was hot after Star Wars and Alien and all this stuff. And Harryhausen saw the writing on the wall, and he said, you know what? Stop motion is not what people want to see anymore from these. And stop motion is kept alive now with a lot of animated films with, Aardman, Laika, Tim Burton, Guillermo del Toro, guys like that. But as an actual way to bring a monster to life or as a special effect, it's pretty much dead. And part of that is because there is a commercial element to that. Whereas, the Hollywood special effects had evolved past stop motion, especially, once Jurassic Park came out, Phil Tippett literally said to his stop motion guys, like, we are extinct. And I think there's a commercial element to that as well, because a lot of that is, will people pay to see a movie with stop motion monsters, or will they say, oh, this is old timey and fake looking and silly looking? And my concern is that I feel like that may be where tokusatsu is in Japan. I think it's going to live on in the TV side of things with Super Sentai, Ultraman, Kamen Rider shows, that stuff, independent short films, things like that, stuff like Howl from Beyond the Fog and Brush of the God. But I do wonder, I often do wonder, when Anno scrapped that puppet for Shin Godzilla, was that really the final nail in the coffin? And, with seeing how less of that there was with Shin Ultraman, I kind of think it might have been. And from what I understand, tokusatsu in Japan is considered very niche, and, man in suit stuff, really isn't what moviegoers want to see. So I think there's probably a commercial studio element to that as well. And it's sad, you look at quotes from Anno from 10 years ago talking about how it's a sacred art form and stuff like that. And it reminds you of like when George Lucas was saying, don't mess with old movies, when people were starting to colorize things. And so I don't know. I think it's pretty dire, honestly. Kevin, how do you feel?
Yeah. It's I think we'll continue to see Minoru Kawasaki use suits because
low budget stuff. Yeah,
he doesn't have the money to do full CGI, but he's not trying to have something that's I guess an international theatrical release or something like that. But honestly, I think in terms of practical suitmation and that sort of puppet work, probably those Attack on Titan movies are going to be the last hurrah, because it's something that is just, even when those came out, I thought that, they didn't look the best, but it was definitely not well received in terms of the effects in those. And a lot of people are like, why don't you just do full CGI? And I think that probably had a big impact on Shin Godzilla when that was in development, that they were afraid of being lampooned, and decided to go with the standard, kind of tried and true, what's selling right now in Hollywood approach.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and it's even more unfortunate that guy making a lot of this new stuff is literally, in my opinion, the master of bringing tokusatsu into the 20th century. And I mean, there's no one better than it combining live action and CG is Higuchi. So it's unfortunate. I feel like I can only imagine that in Japan, if someone were to say, oh, the next Godzilla movie is going to be done with a man in a suit, people like us would probably think it was cool. Same if we heard, oh, Steven Spielberg's going to make a stop motion dinosaur movie, we'd think it was cool. But would the mainstream average Joe ticket buyers think it was cool, or would they just not get it? And I feel like they probably just wouldn't get it. Raph is asking, how do you feel about Shin Kamen Rider's chances at the box office? I only ask because it appears to be a more semi-obscure and low-budget affair compared to Shin Godzilla and Shin Ultraman. This is another thing that Kevin and I talked about not too recently. My answer is that in Japan, I think it's probably going to do well. Shin Godzilla did amazing. Shin Ultraman did not as good as Shin Godzilla, but it did really well. Anno's name still kind of prints money. It definitely looks cheaper to those, and some of that might be intentional just with how the Toei shows looked. But in Japan, I think it'll do fairly well. I know stuff like Kamen Rider Black Sun, which was on Amazon, didn't do all too hot, but I think the mainline Kamen Rider shows and merch sales are all over there better than Godzilla and Ultraman sales. So I think it stands a really good chance at the Japanese box office. Over here, I don't know. I'm pretty skeptical. When you consider how long it took for Shin Ultraman to get not only a distributor, but then ink a deal for home video. I mean, they ended up going with Cleopatra Entertainment, which, that's not a Funimation or, any of the big exporters of Japanese entertainment. I mean, they're very much known for, straight to video kind of, I don't know, like Bruce Willis action movies or whatever. Their biggest release is Veronica, the Glenn Danzig directed movie. So I would doubt it would get a theatrical release here. And with Shin Kamen Rider, I wouldn't be surprised if it took a few years for it to come out here after its Japanese release. Kamen Rider here, the baby boomer generation's familiar with Ultraman. Maybe some people that watch the Netflix anime. So it's not, even Ultraman is not what Godzilla is as far as a big brand in the States. And Kamen Rider has even less of a presence outside of, the online, geek communities like us, and, the fan subbers and stuff like that. I don't know, Kevin, how do you feel? I mean, I don't even know if any of that makes sense to you.
Yeah.
But
I mean, frankly, Tsuburaya has been pushing very, very hard to get Ultraman recognized stateside. Between these Mill Creek things and the Marvel comics and the Mego figures and all sorts of other miscellaneous things, the Ultraman Connection website. And while there has been kind of a token effort for Kamen Rider from Toei, it has not been at the same magnitude. It's okay, we got 3 Blu-ray sets or something like that, as opposed to here's everything. So from that perspective, that's not going to be hitting nearly the same subset of the market. Not to mention the Ultraman was getting into Targets and Walmarts, and Kamen Rider just was not. So I don't think that presence is really going to be warranted for a theatrical release for this new Shin Kamen Rider, unless they're purely banking on that marketability based not on the popularity of Kamen Rider, but on the popularity of Shin Godzilla and Shin Ultraman. But again, because Shin Ultraman, it did well enough in its theatrical play here, but it still struggled to find a distributor. I would be surprised if that sort of momentum carried through to Shin Kamen Rider for a U.S. release. But in Japan, I'm sure it'll do okay.
Yeah, it's also important with Shin Ultraman to think, the box office for that day, the 2 days that it showed were very strong, but it is one of those things that you look at and think like, well, okay, that everyone that wanted to see it probably went out and saw it. I mean, not literally everyone, but most people. So it's like, okay, if that was a wider release, would those attendance numbers be dropping? How quickly would they be dropping? We don't know, but I mean, it did okay, but I don't know if bringing a more obscure property, even with Anno's name, to theaters, I don't know about that. I predict maybe a streaming and physical release, but not anytime soon. So I mean, it'll probably get some festival
circuit.
Yeah, it'll probably get some festival stuff, which if that plays near you, then awesome. But I mean, there is stuff that plays at that doesn't mean anything. The last yokai film from Katakawa, which was a crossover with Daimajin, still nothing here stateside, but it did get some festival screenings. And I mean, yeah, if you know where to look, you can find that movie. But that it's disappointing that hasn't gotten a wide release yet. And that's a Takashi Miike film. He has a strong fan base here. So it's just stuff to think about when really considering what is likely, what's not likely. I think we'd all love for Shin Kamen Rider to be easily and quickly available to us, but I'm not sure if that's the reality. Anything else anyone would like to ask? Yes, no, maybe. Well, we'll leave you for a couple minutes. How many people we got still? Did we bore everyone to death yet? No, we got 11 still. I guess I don't know. I can just talk if we're gonna give people a few minutes. People might be wondering what the state of Kaiju Masterclass is these days. For now, it's essentially what you're looking at. Just some special events, special interviews, special panels, presentations that we want to make available online for people as reference material, things like that. That we've done a few things like a Linda Miller interview. Patrick did his Omori tribute, and we have this. And then there are some things we're trying to work on. We've been talking with Steve Rifle about a few prospects, and we just want to keep delivering interesting content. But as far as another online convention goes, probably not likely, especially anytime soon. We really love doing it. We're really proud of the two we did. But it's a lot of work for something that, I mean, God bless you all. But it's a lot of work in reality, it's a lot of work for something that gets very little eyes. So, we're kind of keeping it alive as a, every so often kind of YouTube thing like this. Raph is asking, is Cleopatra newer? Because he never heard of them until Shin Ultraman. I don't know how new they are. Like I said, they usually, I mean, their MO is like straight to video, like Steven Seagal crap. And like I said, their biggest release was a Verotica, the Glenn Danzig movies. I don't know how old they are. Kevin, do you have any idea how long these guys have been around?
I mean, I think they don't have anything similar in their catalog in terms of no Japanese releases or anything. So I think that might be why they're just off the radar. I think of them as like somebody that puts stuff into red boxes.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I mean, hey, some distro is better than no distro, but it is kind of a sobering, like, here's Ultraman's actual global impact and appeal. kind of thing. Because if Cleopatra picked it up, that means most places weren't interested. Right?
I'm sure,
You know.
because if you look at the dub, it does seem like there were a lot of Crunchyroll people that were working on it. So like I'm sure Crunchyroll was asked.
John says in the early 2000s, there seemed to be confusion why each Godzilla movie was a standalone, aside from the KAIJU films. Now it's accepted. And what do we think of the shift in understanding in 20 years of how we view these films? You know, I kind of, the whole each thing is a new thing deal is definitely strange. But I do think, God, I can't believe I'm saying this. I think that it has helped people accept different interpretations of the character. It's almost expected. I mean, you can tell from the questions that we're being asked. What do you think Godzilla is going to be like in this one? You know, what will he look like? Will he be a good guy or a bad guy? And I think that is kind of a way to keep people on their toes. And so I can't say it's a bad decision. It's just kind of an off the wall one. And it does make me wonder. I've said this before. It makes me wonder if the 98 film had come out today. You know, let's say in 1998 we had a more we got the Yonda movie or something even more traditional. If we got the 98 movie today, I mean, I still think it's a bad movie, whether you think it's Godzilla or not, but I do think that it probably would go down a little smoother than it did when it came out in 1998, because at the time it was so radical. And now we've had all kinds of radical Godzilla interpretations. Shin Godzilla is this weird shape-shifting monstrosity, and he's some weird interdimensional being in Singular Point, and you know, and then the Hollywood Godzilla is more your dinosaur that fights other monsters, more traditional kind of Godzilla. So I mean, we've had crazier stuff come from Japan, more traditional stuff come from out of Hollywood. Up is down, dogs and cats living together. So I think the 98 movie would probably be as a Godzilla be more accepted, and you wouldn't have this Godzilla, it's Zilla stuff that is flaring up again. But yeah, Kevin, how do you think about you know, the last 20 years of this franchise is very different from how it was through 96.
I think that it fits totally in line with every other franchise. Like if you think about Mobile Suit Gundam from the 70s and the 80s, it was all the same continuity, and it's, you know, only super nerds can keep track of what's actually going on. And then, you know, 94 you get G Gundam and it's a complete split, and after that you get Gundam Wing and it's a complete split, and these are very popular because it can bring in a new audience that doesn't have all the baggage from the previous stuff. And then, you know, look at the same thing with Ultraman. You know, that was one big continuity throughout the 60s and 70s, and then the 90s roll around and they do Tiga Dyna, and then they do Gaia, and then Gaia is a fresh continuity from Tiga and Dyna, and it's a new entry point basically every year. Same thing with Kamen Rider 70s and 80s, it was one continuous story, and then when the 2000s rolls around, it's like, okay, every year we're gonna do kind of a soft reboot and have a new main character, and it doesn't have to be the same continuity, and a brand new audience can come in. And I think the Godzilla franchise is just like rolling with that rather than trying to you know, weave everything together until, you know, the cinematic universe is very popular in the States right now thanks to Marvel. So I think on the Hollywood side, they are trying to, you know, tie it all together. But the Japanese, I think it's very typical for Japanese entertainment to kind of have a lot of standalones, whether it's Pretty Cure, Digimon, or you know, name your franchise.
Yeah. It's interesting because at one point Toho was saying like, well, one day maybe we want to start getting more into a Marvel kind of thing, and I don't know, maybe they will. I'm okay with them doing what they're doing. John says, are we saying 98 was ahead of its time? It is what I'm saying, but in a lot of the it was ahead of its time completely by accident and for a lot of the wrong reasons.
It was accidentally the first movie in the Millennium series.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting though to think, you know, there's people, Patrick, our Kaiju Masterclass alum who's running the controls right now. He was a Godzilla 98 baby. That was the first Godzilla he saw. It's what got him into the series, watching the Heisei and Showa movies. And there's like a whole generation of people that, like, whether they think it's good or bad, still have like a connection to it that is like meaningful. So those are always things you got to remember. I mean, that's why I try not to poo-poo remakes and reboots and all that stuff too bad, because I always think everything is going to be someone's first, and those people are going to go back and watch the original stuff, and that's how that is. Same was it's funny, I compare it to Star Wars a little bit. Like, during the time of the prequels, those were the most reviled movies ever, and now it's like, in the wake of the Disney stuff combined with just so many younger fans that saw those first, people like their whole reputation has changed. And I mean, people forget that people hated those movies so much they were like bullying actors into almost committing suicide and stuff. It's just funny how that works out. What? Oh God, Kevin. This is a long answer. John is asking, why is there a war among fans of 98 over the name? I could see him asking this as both a trolling question and a sincere question, so I'll consider it as both. It is a good question, though, and it is something that is probably worth talking about. But this is just, oh my God. Kevin and I have, I mean, I can't say this. We've on and off talked about like collaborating on like a blog like called Kaiju Mythbusters, and we will get there. We want to do it. I want to do it with you, but it's, oh God, I don't know, where do we even start with this one, man?
I mean, there's a spin-off character, Zilla,
Yes,
who appears in Godzilla Final Wars,
yes,
and the Godzilla Rulers of Earth comic, who has a separate trademark, to be a separate licensing agreement,
yes,
from Godzilla,
yes,
but it is based on the 1998 Godzilla, who you can also license.
yes. And so, yeah, and the Final Wars thing came about because at that point in time, the rights to the design of the 98 Godzilla transferred to Toho completely. Anytime you see any piece of Godzilla merchandise with that design, whether it's Japanese or American, it's Toho approved. Now, the point behind it was a gimmick, and a cathartic gimmick, to be like, oh, see, the Japanese Godzilla beat the American Godzilla. That's why they were like, okay, it's a spin-off character. But it is considered a variant of Godzilla, the same way Kiryu would be a variant of Mecha Godzilla. Okay. Now, the Zilla is the character in Final Wars. Now, a lot of fans took that as meaning, oh, it's retconning the 98 movie out of the franchise, which is ridiculous. Both Toho and Sony, to this day, continue to make a lot of money off that movie. It's still shown on TV. It's still the most commonly sold Godzilla movie on physical media. That is true. And in Japan, even, Toho is still licensing Japanese toys of that version of the character as Godzilla. And so I think it's a stubbornness and kind of an eagerness of fans to try and distance that chapter of the franchise that they don't like from what it is. But I mean, it's still Godzilla. It's called Look, is it Godzilla in name only, and that it doesn't include most of what we love about the character? Yes. It is still a Godzilla movie. It was made as a Godzilla movie. It was licensed as a Godzilla movie. It's called Godzilla, therefore it is Godzilla. And so the reason fans go back and forth is because they're confused about why it was two separate characters in Final Wars and in the comic books and things like that. Now, what Kevin is saying is, if you license a piece of Godzilla 98 merchandise from Toho with that Godzilla, you're paying for Godzilla 98. Now, where this has recently gotten confusing, and Kevin and I both have theories about this, none of it is concrete, but it seems solid to me, and that's why it's our theories, is there was Kevin, what's the toy company that made the big one that's coming out? Do you know what it is?
I forget the name of
I
it.
mean, it honestly doesn't matter, but it is being licensed and sold as Zilla. And so now Spiral Toys, Doomzilla says, thank you. So Spiral Toys, when they announced this figure, they said it's Godzilla. We have a Godzilla 98 coming out. Godzilla 98. So now their most recent material and advertising for it says Zilla, and it's in the Godzilla 98 font of the black text in front of the green fire. And that is causing another crazy nonsensical debate with fans because there's this is proof it's a retcon, this is proof Toho wants nothing to do with it, this is proof that they're retconning it out of the franchise, which again doesn't make any sense. And Kevin and I have talked about this offline when we started to see that hubbub earlier this week or last week, whenever it was. And Kevin, I'll just let you say it because it's your theory. And when you told me that, I was like, that makes sense. I could totally see that.
Sure. What I imagine could easily be the case is if the Godzilla 98 is licensed to somebody else right now, and they were presented with the option of, but you can still license Zilla. And a similar case came up with, if you'll remember, Bandai had the SH Figure Arts line. They released the figures for Kamen Rider Ryuki. And Figma, which is a Good Smile company line, wanted to release Ryuki figures, but they couldn't because Bandai had the license. So they licensed Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, which is the same footage that was used in the American version. It's like Power Rangers with Super Sentai. So they were releasing Kamen Rider Dragon Knight figures that were the same scale as Bandai's Kamen Rider Ryuki figures. And it really just feels like a way of sidestepping that, license tie-up and releasing the products that you want to release. And I think that it might be something similar with Zilla, is that they just weren't able to get Godzilla, but,
Doomzilla in the comments says, from what he understands, Spiral got the license from Toho on the condition they licensed the character as Zilla. So if that's the case, we might not know the particulars why, but it could be a situation like that where Toho says this other person already has the license to this. You can license it under Zilla though, because someone else has already licensed this creation under Godzilla, and maybe that's what prompted it. I mean, this is all guesswork on our part, but I mean, it is true though that when Spiral announced this toy, they were calling it Godzilla, and it was just very recently that it changed. So that is another thing that has me thinking there's some kind of licensing issue there, and you can license this and release it, but you can't brand it as Godzilla because someone else can do that. You can do it if you call it Zilla. So I don't know. I think it's a theory that makes sense. I certainly I mean, as recently as with the last 2 years, Japanese toy companies were putting out Godzilla 98 figures as Godzilla. And
Cast and X Plus both had something. So
so I mean, and we'll probably see more. It definitely doesn't seem like Toho are interested in distancing themselves from that being a Godzilla movie. I don't think people really realize, the Final Wars thing was a gimmick, and even Godzilla 2000, that was coming out because it was like, okay, Godzilla's popular right now, and so Toho were like, let's do our own to strike while the iron's hot. And so I think there's a lot of marketing stuff. Doomzilla says his assumption is that the Deforial, I never say these words out loud, so I don't know if I'm saying it right, used the 98 name, and that was probably when they so maybe X Plus is still having the license that they used when they did that figure, I think is what he's saying. I mean, that's a good theory. I don't know a Spiral from an X Plus, from a Star Ace, from a YMSF, from a whatever, but I think that would track probably. Probably depends on what figure it is. Like, I'm not familiar with Spiral, but it seems like kind of an almost like the really high end X Plus figures in style and and stuff like that. And he says maybe X Plus is planning a 98 Godzilla soon. Again, very good theory there. But yeah, it's silly. It's a back and forth debate that is silly and not really founded in anything. Neither Toho or Sony would benefit much from distancing themselves from that movie. I mean, they still make money off of it as a Godzilla movie, both in marketing, TV showings, DVD, Blu-ray sales, toys on both sides of the country. It just wouldn't make any sense. It's still profitable as much as most of us dislike that film.
Yeah, I think fans are the only ones that really get hung up on.
Yeah. It's always interesting to me when we've had this much time go by that, people still. I mean, I don't like that movie either. Trust me, I do not like that movie. But it's very strange that after all this time, it's still something people treat like is still hurting them. There's been so many Godzilla movies and TV shows and comic books and everything since then. It's just a weird footnote. It did give us an awesome animated series, though.
Indeed.
Let's see who's still with us. We still have 10 people with us. Interesting. Well, thank you all for hanging out. I guess I don't know. We'll give about 30 to 60 seconds for some more questions to filter in. If we don't have anything, we'll peace out for the night. But yeah, this will be really interesting to see where this Yamazaki movie goes, and if it'll be a one-off or if it'll start a new continuity or what. I mean, the possibilities are endless. Oh, John says, how do you feel about the boom of Godzilla in the last 14 years from 2005 to 2014? It was a barren wasteland. Now it's almost too much of a good thing. It's a double-edged sword, my friend. If I was 9 years old again, this would be like the best time to be alive. I mean, when I was I mean, I'm dating myself, but I remember before the Trendmasters toys even existed, and it was like all I had were my little Imperial figures, and now it's like I can't turn around without being smacked in the head by some crazy crass commercialization of Godzilla. I mean, I do think keeping the brand alive. I hate that I even called it a brand. I think it's a good thing for the longevity of the stuff that's come before. I always say there's so much Godzilla stuff I love. If they keep making them till the day I die and I don't like a single thing that's coming out from this point forward, whatever comes out now is just gravy. If I like some of it, awesome. If I don't, hey, I can live with it. I got tons of movies, TV shows, comic books, all kinds of stuff I can go back to and enjoy. I am not, it's not mine. And even they could put out the worst Godzilla movie in the world tomorrow, and that's going to be some kid's first Godzilla movie, and then he's going to go discover Ishiro Honda's films, and that's always a good thing. I do think it's a little just the overall globalization of and corporatization of geek culture and IP can be a little gross to me as an adult. Like, as a kid, I'd be bugging my mom every time we're at the grocery store to get Godzilla hot sauce. As an adult, I do think it's kind of like, ugh, and so, I mean, merch can be a good thing. I'm not poo-pooing merch overall, but it's just a reminder that everything is going to be kind of milked to death a little bit, and it does have its place. But I mean, it's not something I'm super into, is, seeing it literally every time I, open my eyes. It's like, it is literally too much of a good thing. It's like, guys, calm down. Like Doomzilla said, I mean, we're not, no one wants to pay $50 for Godzilla hot sauce. There are people that will do it, but not me. I don't know. Kevin, as people may be able to see from some of the stuff in the background of your apartment, you are more of a collector merch kind of guy. I mean, how do you feel now that we are just drowning in this stuff?
Oh, the key is not to try to be a super completionist. And, you know, if you have more options, then you can really just focus on the ones that you like, but don't feel like you need to buy every Godzilla keychain just because it's a Godzilla keychain.
Yeah.
And the same even applies to the media. And, you know, if you're like, I don't really like the Godzilla versus Power Rangers comic, for an example, you can just say, okay, well, I don't have to keep reading this. I can go back and read Godzilla versus Charles Barkley until they come out with something I do like.
Yeah.
But if they keep churning through stuff, odds are there's going to be more things that you do like as well. So,
Yeah,
you know.
it's one of those things where, like, not, I guess, I mean, I feel a lot different about this franchise than I did in 1998. And I always say, you know, when I talk to people like Kevin about this, I always say, you know, it's not 1998 anymore. People pretend it's like 1998 again. I mean, the franchise, Godzilla, King Kong, I mean, even maybe Gamera at this point, Ultraman, whatever. I mean, their places as pop culture icons is more or less etched in stone, which means, for better or worse, they're going to keep making this stuff until long beyond we're dead. And with that in mind, it's like, okay, if I don't like Yamazaki's take on Godzilla, within 5 years, someone else will have a new take on it that I can check out. You know, the fandoms, any of them. I mean, just look at what's going on with DC, for crying out loud. If you don't like one, you know, continuity or one director's take on something, I mean, you know, if I don't like Zack Snyder's Superman or Batman, hey, it's barely been 5 years and there's already a new Batman and another Superman coming. You know, if I don't like Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, there's already another Spider-Man. If you don't like Tom Holland's Spider-Man, guess what? In 10 years, you're going to get another Spider-Man. That's just how the longevity of this stuff works these days. And I mean, the fact that we're just recycling all these IPs over and over and over and over and over instead of trying to actively develop new ones is a problem. But, you know, it means if you see a new Godzilla thing and it sucks, you think it's no good, I mean, it's not anything to get worked up about or angry about, or you know, it's almost like if I don't like the next Godzilla thing, it's like, okay, who cares? That means I might just like the next one. That's how I feel.
And nothing has been, there haven't been permanent alterations, shall we say. So it's,
Yeah.
you know, if,
Yeah. I mean, the stuff with, like, avoiding the nuclear angle is a little off-putting, but then you might get something like Singular Point that just ignores it and does something brand new with the character that isn't really related to that you might like, you know? So, I mean, nothing is super dire. I will not address John's Varan question, although it is funny. And yeah, like that's basically what Doomzilla says here, is basically what I was saying. You know, more people can become Godzilla fans, especially children. And I mean, you know, I know kids that watched, you know, Skull Island and went and watched the 33 Kong and liked it. I mean, there's never a bad, you know, I mean, any opportunity to get a kid to pay attention to this stuff is probably good. All right. Well, unless anyone has anything immediate, I'll give you guys a 10 seconds to think of something else. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
yeah. I'll just say,
2,
hopefully Yamazaki's movie does well, and I really hope it brings attention to his other stuff. And I want a box set of the Always movies to be
like
here.
I said, even if it sucks, I mean, it'll put Godzilla out there. Some kid will see it and go watch other stuff. It's kind of like that. A rising tide raises all ships cliche. But all right, guys, well, we're gonna head out. But thank you all for checking it out. Those of you who stuck around with us and asked us questions and made us think and use our gray matter a bit. Thank you guys very much. And yeah, I mean, Kaiju Masterclass is not dead, and there will be some content we will have in the future. It's just we're working on it behind the scenes, but the second we have it figured out, you guys will know. But thanks again, and we're gonna peace out. Kevin, thank you, of course, for the wonderful presentation.
Of course.
All right. Bye, everybody.